What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. We are bringing on Matthew Vines. Matthew, thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
nice to meet you.
Happy to have you. You too. I know this is the first time we've met, so hopefully in person someday, but this will have to do for now. Matthew Vines wrote the book God and the Gay Christian, which came out about 10 years ago, or exactly 10 years ago, give or take a day or two, because he just released his 10th anniversary copy, and there's new content in there, along with some new updates, which we will get to in a bit. But this book has been really formative for Christians or gays in the Christian church. I know a lot of people have read this book first in their journey to discovering if being gay and Christian is actually even feasible. So for this 10th anniversary, we're honored to have Matthew here to tell us more about this book. And also, I want to hear more about you because I don't know as much about you as I should. Would you be okay if, to start, we kind of dug into how you got where you are now, a little bit of your backstory, so to speak?
Sounds good.
Awesome. We would love to hear it. Well, let's start off at the start. Childhood. What was that like?
Yeah, so I am from Wichita, Kansas. I don't know if you've ever been to Kansas.
I have been to Kansas. It is quaint. No, it's nice. There's some really cool stuff there, actually.
Where have you been in Kansas?
So I've got a buddy in Kansas City, which is actually Missouri, but I've been on a lot of Christian music tours, which is another part of my lore. And I believe I've been to Wichita, and then what's the other big city?
I mean, those are the two big ones. There's Topeka.
Topeka.
That's the capital city. Okay.
Topeka. But I lived in a motorhome. I drove a lot, so I've been to a lot. I've almost.
Okay. Well, that's impressive.
Again, yeah, I was a teenager, but this is about you, not me.
Okay, but most people haven't been to Kansas, so no, I like Kansas. I like the Wizard of Oz. I'm glad that that's our main pop culture representation. I feel like it's very positive. But no, so I grew up in an evangelical Presbyterian church, and my parents, I'd say the most important thing to them that they wanted to share with my sister and me was their faith in Jesus, and I think they did a very good job of not only sharing that with us, but also just modeling their faith in their everyday lives in terms of how they treated people. And so the message of God being loving and us being called to love others as God has loved us, I feel like was very clear. So I think my parents did a great job in just modeling what it looks like to be a good follower of Jesus. And so from as early as I can remember, I have been a Christian. That's been the most important part of my life, my worldview, and I had an overall very positive experience in the church that I grew up in, which was it was a Presbyterian church. It was actually, for people who are into the denominational things, there's dozens of different Presbyterian denominations. It was part of the Presbyterian Church USA, which is the largest Presbyterian denomination in the country, that became affirming in 2011. However, my church was part of the evangelical wing of the PCUSA that was very much not on board with that. And
so close. You almost were in an affirming church, like that close.
Well, it was not really. I mean, in some ways it wasn't that close at all because I wasn't aware of anyone in the church. There was no one in the church who publicly was affirming.
Got it.
But the evangelical wing of the PCUSA effectively no longer exists because after the PCUSA allowed for the ordination of gay clergy in 2011, the evangelical churches in the denomination pretty much all left to go to other denominations, including the church that I was raised in. So I wasn't really that close to it. But it was interesting because it was, even though it was not a live debate within my church, because everyone in the church at least seemingly agreed that there should be no debate about it, we were still in a denomination where it was being debated. And so to the extent that I ever heard about it, which, I mean, I didn't even know gay people existed until I was in middle school because I did theater.
Midwest. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Oh, that's when you found, and then you found a lot of gays, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah, no, I did. And I did a show with I did some shows with our regional theater company, which is amazing. And some of the adults in the cast were gay. And I remember I was talking to my mom about this in the car after a cast party. And I just thought, my concern was, I just said, I just feel like these people would not feel welcome at our church.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, because I'd never heard anyone mention it before. I'd never heard any discussion about it. I just kind of intuitively felt like, I don't think they'd feel welcome. And
wait, but you'd been hearing about this. Well, this is kind of like splitting your denomination in half almost, like the gay issue, because they're accepting it. So you're hearing about this beforehand, but you're not really connecting the dots of like, oh, these are the people that they're mad about.
Well, I mean, not really, because so to put it all in the right timeline, this was probably 2002 when I was in middle school and first found out that gay people existed. This didn't actually split the denomination until 2011. So I was totally unaware that this was a denominational. I was not up on the denominational drama when I was in middle school.
Okay. So you didn't really know what gay people were, and all of a sudden you're getting to theater, and you're like, oh, this is what are those? What is that?
And so I guess, and then basically what I was taught, I understand. And I remember, gay marriage was up for a vote in Kansas in 2005 for whether to ban it via constitutional amendment. And at the time, I mean, I knew that we were supposed to be against it, and I was. But then there were parts of me when there were, friends of mine in school who would push back and say, like, well, this is kind of discrimination against gay people. And I thought, it does sound a little bit like that, doesn't it? And I don't like that. And so then I would I went home and I asked my parents, I was like, okay, can you remind me again? Like, so I know we're against it. Why though? Like, what's our reason for being against it? And my dad, at this point, opened the Bible to Genesis 19, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Describing the men of Sodom wanting to, quote, have sex with the, visitors who'd come to Lot's house. And God destroys the city with fire and brimstone. And so my dad just said, well, that's that. These men wanted to have sex with other men, and God destroyed the city. And so that's why this is not something that we support as Christians. And I remember it didn't quite make perfect sense to me at the time. Something about it didn't seem to fully add up. But I was thought, well, I guess. I mean, I don't really.
Says and Dad says, then.
I didn't know enough. I just thought, okay, I guess, so I was hardly like a passionate opponent of same-sex marriage, but I did think, okay, this is what our position needs to be as Christians. But then by the time I went to college, I had gotten to know, it's not like I was close friends with any gay people, but it was just, especially, so I went to college at Harvard, which is in Massachusetts. And that was one of the few states at the time that had already legalized same-sex marriage. And it was a very different culture in the sense that this wasn't even really a controversial topic at all. There just were openly gay students and faculty and people living completely happy, normal lives. But I also would meet other students who had grown up in Christian households, came out when they were teenagers, and had not really seen or talked to their family much at all since because they'd been kicked out of their homes. Yeah. And it was also a bit disorienting to me how many other students I would meet who were from more secular, liberal backgrounds whose impression of Christianity was quite negative, but for reasons that... But their aversion to Christianity felt like it was rooted in some Christian principles, which was that they felt like Christianity was hurting their friends who were different. And their friends who were then being mistreated just for something about them that was different. And I thought, that's actually, I feel like that's a pretty Christian impulse that you have this protective desire for people on the margins of society or your community, and you care a lot about them and don't want to see them be marginalized and mistreated. I was thinking, well, it's actually a really good reason to be a Christian. But
absolutely.
I mean, I wasn't trying to push it on anybody, but I just thought this is very disorienting to me because the reason why a lot of people seem uninterested in Christianity, it's all a little topsy-turvy. And
I mean, most of us when we were kids were the good guys as Christians. We want to help people. That's our number one thing. We want to help the weak. We want to help the starving, the widow, the orphan. So in our brains, if you're raised correctly as a Christian, you should be really worried about people who are treated poorly. Those should be our number one priority. So there's a disconnect there.
Right. And you go after the one lost sheep, right?
Yes.
So you feel like, well, it's not very many people who are gay. I was like, but it doesn't need to be. It's very concerning to me that. And so it was definitely causing me a lot of cognitive dissonance. And I remember but for me, I mean, my faith in Jesus was still now. The side note to all of this is I could have, had I been open to it, I suppose, understood that I was gay from probably age 14 or so.
So I am curious about that. So you're dealing with all this very mentally, but
I had shoved all that down.
Feel it? Like, was there little sparks of it that you just cognitive dissonance your way out of?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Okay, so you had there are moments where you were doing things that are a little fruity and you're like, that didn't happen.
Well, I mean, I was attracted to the same sex, but
that's a big one.
I did not acknowledge that I was attracted to the same sex.
Okay, I can relate. I did something very similar. So you were feeling feelings for them, but you just kind of pretend like you weren't?
Yeah, it's like, so I wanted to see like every Jake Gyllenhaal movie. But that's just, and I acknowledged, of course, Jake Gyllenhaal was attractive, but he was objectively attractive, right?
Yeah.
He was
just
not
admiring another man.
Yeah, that doesn't make me gay. Well, and I mean, there's a little bit of truth to this in that, like, I am not attracted to women, but I can acknowledge when I think there are women who are objectively attractive, for sure.
Yes.
And I can appreciate, like, their beauty at a certain level. I'm just not attracted to them personally. So I was trying to take that basic principle and rationalize my way out of genuinely being attracted to the same sex, of just being like, well, you know, it could just be an objective acknowledgement of beauty. And I also did this thing in my mind where I thought, well, because you've never been anybody other than yourself, so you never really know what other people are experiencing. So I thought, it's possible that this is what being straight is. It's possible that everyone is secretly working to suppress their same-sex attractions and to manufacture heterosexual attraction. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's possible because it can't be disproven.
I mean, as an overthinker, absolutely, because you're taught in a framework that this doesn't really exist. Being gay technically doesn't really exist in the way that you feel it. So what you're feeling doesn't fit any mold that the Christian church lets you believe in. What you're feeling is not possible according to the church, because being gay is a choice and something that you'd have to lean into and have some sort of defilement to become. It's not just this natural thing that happens inside us, which is what we actually experience.
Yeah, not even necessarily that it's a choice, but I remember when I was meeting some gay people in theater, I thought, well, they're all in their 20s. Like, maybe I've never seen a gay person in their 70s. I've never seen like a gay couple that's like old. And so maybe, you know, and it's not like I was convinced it would go away, but as long as you have that possibility in your head, because you have to have something to, if the cognitive dissonance, when it becomes too great, eventually things break. And so you have to have something that is like well, I haven't seen this yet, so maybe my beliefs will still all work out.
When the truth is certain death in our minds, your brain will find any escape from that.
100%. And I'm very grateful that our brains work this way, because sometimes you really do need to just do a lot of gymnastics for a period of time in order to prevent yourself from like handling truths that you can't accept. But that can only go on for so long, and it's not really a healthy, like, and you can feel oftentimes whether you're doing that, because you can feel, is this like a stable place to be in, or is it increasingly under tension? So I think that but by the time that I was a freshman in college, I still had decided, I mean, if you went, on Facebook, when everyone put their interested in section, do you remember this? Mm-hmm. So I was still interested in women, which is hilarious. But you kind of have to say that. Like, you kind of have to put that there, because if you don't put that there, like, especially as a conservative Christian, like, you really, like, if you don't have anything there, it's like kind of making a statement by not making a statement.
Wait, so at this point, you're at college, but just pull back 1 second. How is your emotional condition this whole time? Because I know you're in cognitive dissonance. You're not thinking about it, but internally, are you feeling poorly, or are you feeling okay? You've managed to push it all out?
I was thriving. I was doing great.
You were just like, nah, this isn't a thing. We're fine. Life is great.
At least, well, because I have a sister who's 2 years older than me, and she didn't date anybody in high school, which was awesome. It was awesome because that, and then she had, she dated in college, but the fact that she didn't date anybody in high school meant that I didn't need to date anybody in high school.
You were just a good Christian family who saved yourselves very well.
Well, but it wasn't even about that necessarily. I mean, that's part of it, but that's not even the main thing. It's like, it's just that it didn't create, there was no weirdness about like, oh, why am I not dating anybody? It's like, well, she didn't date anybody. Like, there's nothing strange about that. We're just very dedicated to our studies and extracurriculars, which we were.
Yes.
So I was very busy, and I had a good time in high school, and I was perfectly content to just not address this.
Okay, so single, happy, everything is just fine.
I mean, but also, like, I feel like most high schoolers can be perfectly happy being single.
Yes,
but
and then you get to college, and then, sorry.
Yeah,
continue.
but then, no, I mean, once I did come out, most of my friends from high school were just like, oh, yeah, definitely, we knew that. And I was like, well, that doesn't feel good. I didn't.
Thanks for saying nothing.
But, they should have said nothing, for sure.
Well, also, what do you do? Like, do they tell you, or that's a whole other thing? But yeah.
Yeah, no. But anyway, so then by the time I was in college, I was just feeling increasing, like, just meeting more and more gay people, hearing their stories, and just feeling like this is not aligning, like, the harm that I feel like is clearly being done here does not make sense to me. I don't see any redemptive purpose for this sort of suffering. It's not that Christian teachings shouldn't ever be difficult. They often are. But there should be a rhyme or reason to how a certain amount of suffering that we might endure is helping to make us more like Christ, is helping to conform us more to the image of God. And with the suffering that I was seeing happening for gay people, it didn't really seem to make any sense. And it also seemed deeply unfair at a fundamental level. Like, it just triggered my, like, injustice radar, where I just felt like, okay. So I remember my parents came to visit me at college. This was like a year in, and we just went out for dinner, and I spent the whole time just like grilling them on their views about Christianity and gay people. And I was just like, okay, so I just want to get this straight. Like, what is your belief? Like, what is Christianity asking of gay people? And I wasn't getting much of a response. So I was like, well, I'll tell you what I think it is. I think what you're saying is that gay people are like need to remain alone for their entire lives in terms of any romantic relationship, and that they should, while they will watch their friends date, fall in love, maybe get their hearts broken, fall in love again, get married, form a family, even though they have the same capacity for that and the same desire for that, if they meet someone where they are falling in love and want to make a commitment and get married and form a family, even though they could do that, they and they alone should not do that. And they basically need to go sit in the corner and like while they watch all their friends experience these same blessings and gifts and joys, but because they're attracted to the same sex, I was like, it seems to me like we're just saying gay people need to be alone forever. And my dad kind of pushed back, and he was like, well, Matthew, you're assuming that being gay is something that will always be the case for someone, right? Kind of like that thing. Like, you're assuming it's a permanent thing. And I said, at this point, I am assuming that because I really do think that that is true. And I do think that's kind of the fundamental divide in the church in terms of, like, do you really acknowledge the reality of sexual orientation? Because, this is where the whole, you have side B, side A, and they do generally both acknowledge this reality. But this is why side B comes under such intense attack from more conservative elements in the church, like side Y and side X, because side B has essentially made what I would say is a concession to reality. They have made an acknowledgement of a fundamental fact about the world, which is that gay people exist, that it is not a choice, that it is not something that people can change, that for a certain relatively small percentage of the world, they are exclusively attracted to members of the same sex. And whether we reckon with that reality and acknowledge it, to me is kind of just like, I get why side Y and side X want to resist that reality. Even if they can't fully deny it, they want to put some caveats around it. Because the moment that you truly acknowledge it, the cognitive dissonance starts to increase significantly. And that's, I think, ultimately what pushes people to an affirming position is once they have reckoned with that reality that gay people exist. So all that to say, I eventually, I may be taking too long here, but eventually
that's a good point, though. Absolutely.
Yeah, so eventually once I I changed my mind on the topic, I actually then became passionate, feeling like I did enough Bible study with some other students in the Christian ministry I was a part of, which was not an affirming Christian ministry, but I found some other students who were asking similar questions, and we kind of did like a Bible study together, and that was extremely helpful for me. I still obviously went to a lot more depth later, but I felt like it wasn't quite as black and white as I had originally thought, and so and that was very important for me because like the Bible is pretty foundational to my worldview and my belief system, and so I felt this intense conflict, but I couldn't be content with resolving it by being like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to move on from the Bible. That would, like, to me, I can't do that. And so, because that's just like so foundational to my whole belief system. But so just recognizing that, okay, I actually think there's a lot more complexity here than I had originally understood was very, very helpful for me. And so then I felt like it was something the church was shooting itself in the foot. I was very passionate, like, oh, the church really needs to like do better on this. But I had to actually be passionate about the topic for 6 months on an impersonal level before I was ever willing to then actually like ask any more personal questions. And I'm really glad I was able to go through it in that order, because I think one thing that a lot of gay people struggle with and a lot of gay Christians struggle with is that they're aware of their sexuality while they're still really believing a non-affirming view. And then they're always like, wait, is this just self-serving? Like, am I changing my mind just because I personally want this? And so, and then especially if other people are telling you that's what you're doing, then that can, I think, make it harder or make people feel like, oh, they don't know. So I feel like I'm very grateful that I went through this whole process of changing my mind when it was really just about how I was like, I would have changed my mind regardless of my own sexual orientation. And I think I would have had a very similar trajectory in terms of why and when I changed my mind, even if I had been straight, because that's just, it's not really about, oh, this is my personal experience. I'm super attracted to the same sex, so I must find a way to be in a same-sex relationship. That really wasn't it at all. It's like, no, I'm just looking at the world, and this seems to be a fact about the world that people did not understand that long ago. And now that a lot more people have come out and we've tried to go through all these conversion therapy programs that failed so epically, now I feel like we should acknowledge that this is a thing. And we have to then like think a little bit more carefully about some of this as a result.
No, I think that makes your testimony much stronger. I can relate to that as well, because I also didn't want to just, I was thinking that being gay might not be bad before I even confronted whether I was or not, because I also was kind of in cognitive dissonance. But the idea that just seeing everything around you, you weren't doing it for yourself, you were doing it for these other gay people you've met that you've realized, oh, I don't think you could ever be straight, and all these different experiences where you're watching people suffer and you're realizing, well, why would God want these people to live like this, and fully going down this, like you were talking about earlier, how people have once you get to side A and B where you actually believe being gay exists, you have to really confront all these beliefs. Like for X and Y is basically, it's like X-gay stuff. It's like you believe that you can change, etc. But once you truly believe that gay people, A, do exist, and B, will probably have to be alone their whole lives if they follow an average Christian church's teaching, ideally, someone with a lot of empathy would want to change things. And so that's where you were at. You were not even acknowledging that you were yourself were gay. You just probably, partially because you do like things that gay people like, had interacted with so many gay people that you're like, okay, there's something not right here. So your injustice sensor's going off, and you're like, I've got to do something about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably just also my age. Like, it's like I don't know very many people my age who weren't interacting with openly gay people at that point. Like, there were just a lot more people who had come out. So it's a much harder thing. I think that's part of the generational rift oftentimes between children and their parents. Is like, my parents were raised in a really different time and grew up in a really different time. My dad, I was the first openly gay person that my dad knew once I came out to him. Yeah. He had known of a couple people who he later heard were gay, or one of whom died of AIDS or something like that, which is terrible. But he didn't, it's not like, so for him, like, it, of course that's going to shape the way that you think about things if you don't have those kind of data points in view. So yeah, but anyway, so then I ended up, well, it's funny, when I was actually in this phase for 6 months where I was like, oh, the church, I was passionate about it, but was still trying to suppress my own awareness of my own sexual orientation. Internally, I thought, well, I would never say this publicly because this doesn't sound right, but I guess I'm going to say it now, but it's okay. I can say it now. I was like, it would be really helpful if some gay person, when they came out, was willing to just like stick around and help explain how to interpret these verses in the Bible, because I was like, some gay person, it would be really helpful, because I remember I went to YouTube and I was like, I want to find a talk that just breaks down the Bible and same-sex relationships and that helps me understand these verses in a way that is still upholding the authority of the Bible. Because I was like, I feel like I can see how the pieces can come together, but it's kind of complicated. There's kind of a lot going on. And most of the resources that I found when I was researching it were coming from a more explicitly progressive theological position that was not dedicated to the authority of the Bible. And so they would often have some correct, good, like factual, historical information in them, but then they would also say, on page 1, well, the Bible's pretty wacky and has a lot of things in it that we don't believe. And then it moves on, and I'm like, well, I'm certainly not going to give this to my dad.
Yeah.
And also, like, this doesn't help me either feel more confident in the perspective that this is coming from. Obviously, it's not very hard to have an affirming position if you don't care about the Bible.
Right.
Like,
it's a whole different game you're playing at that point.
Right. Like, it's then of course, what's the issue? So I think what I was struggling with was not being able to find resources that I found a lot of resources that had good things, but then also had other things in them where I was like, no, that's not helping. And so I just thought it would be really great if some gay person in the church, instead of and I was like, I totally understand why a lot of them just leave and never want to talk to Christians again. I totally get it. But I said it would be super helppful if someone were able to just stop and explain all of this, because I was like, I feel like there are a lot of Christians who would really like that sort of a resource. Consequently, so then fast forward to the end of that year when I was coming out to myself, which initially I was actually horrified by, and then I had to go through this whole rational process where I was like, wait, you already worked through all of your thoughts on this and you actually don't think it's bad and you don't think it's wrong. Yeah. So why are you horrified by this? And I was like, well, I guess I'm horrified.
What got you? Well, finish that sentence, but then what got you there? What were the final notes where you're like, oh, maybe I'm actually gay? But
I think I was actually, I was happy in high school and I was depressed in college. So I think I had to be depressed enough for a long enough period of time in order to then try to ask questions about, why might I be this depressed? And I actually I would write these poems in Spanish that I'm sure were not very good, but at least it feels like it's an extra layer of encryption almost, and I went back and I read some of them, and these were a year before, and I was like, oh, these poems are basically saying that, hey, I think there's something about myself that I really don't want to acknowledge, think it would really potentially mess up my life, but it's probably bringing me down a lot. And I was like, wow, that seems pretty direct, and yet I still, anyway.
But it's in Spanish, so you have more cognitive dissonance. That's your way of writing cognitive dissonance out. You use another language. That's
exactly.
Actually wild.
And I'm sure if any native Spanish speakers read this, they would not be that impressed with the poetry, okay? But okay. I've never written poetry in English, though. I think in English, I actually feel too self-conscious about it. Poetry seems like the hardest kind of writing to do.
So your Spanish-speaking self was the gayest and most honest part of you for some reason. That was the Spanish part of you was always gay, maybe, and always honest.
Well, because I spent the summer in Argentina actually after my freshman year of college, and not really, but but. No, it was not a particularly gay summer, although actually our group from school, so we had all 30 kids from our school who went there, and a couple of them were gay, and so we would go out to different nightlife on the weekends, and there were a couple weekends where they were like, hey, we really need to go to a gay club because we're only going to straight clubs, and we should be for us, can we go to a gay club this time? So we went to a gay club one time, and it was just interesting. I mean, I always got too tired and had to go home early.
Yeah.
Because in Argentina, I don't know if you know, but people party till 6 a.m. and it's
1 a.m. Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah. I couldn't keep up with it.
I love to sleep.
But anyway, that's beside the point. My whole point was by the time then that I did then I think my depression kind of forced me to like be like, okay, I think I felt like I was not going to be able to overcome that or get out of that rut that I was in until I probably like dealt with some of this. But go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, what was fueling your depression? Were you worried about being alone forever? Were you feeling romances that you couldn't pursue? Like, or were you, yeah?
I mean, I think I was actually feeling a lack of a sense of purpose in life. I was extremely like driven, and in high school in particular, and was like extremely busy and did a lot of things that I found incredibly enjoyable and satisfying and exciting. And then I go to college, and Harvard's a really interesting place, and I have a love-hate relationship with it because there's many things about it that I have a great appreciation for, but it's not like a loving, supportive community. It's just not. I mean, it's much more, people are hyper independent, and there's a lot of people who show up on day one planning their Senate campaign for the future. And they have their ladder climbing plan is already set, and they've found their clique from week one, and they're off to the races. And by the end of year one, I think I just felt like, wow, like I don't have a big life plan, and I don't have my position worked out on all 425 policy issues that all these other students seem to have their really clear views on. And so I think I was just feeling increasingly like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And I felt much more adrift than before. So it wasn't necessarily, now ironically, coming out actually helped give me more of a sense of purpose, because it also then aligned with like, oh, there's these really significant needs that I was experiencing already in terms of some of the accessible theological resources for more theologically conservative Christians. And it's a topic that I was becoming passionate about. And so in a weird way, actually, it did align with like helping to, I have not had any depression related to feeling like unclear about like what I was doing with my life ever since then. So that's something.
That's really interesting. So you say your depression was about lack of clarity for what you want to do, for your destiny, so to speak. But meanwhile, you also had never had any romantic stories in your life. You never had any of that journey. And I wonder, like, that's really interesting that coming out was the solution to your not solution to your depression, but whatever was going on. I don't know, like I feel like there may be more connection to suppressing yourself than you even realize, because I hear a lot of stories, especially if you're in cognitive dissonance, where suppressing this and lying to yourself just leads to not feeling quite aligned, quite right. And even like, or if you want to spiritualize it, because I get more and less spiritual depending on what year I'm in. Like I've done a little bit of deconstruction, but like if you think about it, if a big part of your destiny was to talk about these things, and you have this lock blocking off a big part of your identity that is actually going to speak into your destiny, it's really like your biggest mission in this next several year phase of your life is behind this locked door of being in the closet. So whatever it is, there's a lot in that of the depression being there when you were in the closet and then lifting when you came out. I just think that's really interesting.
Oh, I'm sure it probably is. There's probably
Layers.
more to it than the way I was
Layers.
like maybe consciously processing it. But when I did then acknowledge to myself for the first time that I was gay, I was super not happy about it.
Really?
And I was so not happy about it that then I did this other weird thing where I said, but look around. I was like, you see a lot of gay people here, and they're all happy, and they're all fine with being gay. So if you are this unhappy about the thought that you're gay, maybe you're not.
Oh my gosh.
Like, maybe that means you're not, because everybody else is cool with it, and because also, like, I objectively was like, I think it's okay for people to be gay. Like, I don't have, like, I think it's fine. And so anyway, I think it was just, I didn't want my whole life to be, like, radically upended, which it was.
Yeah,
I mean, I never ended up graduating from college
because
no way. I was a sophomore
Too gay.
When this
They didn't
happened.
like gays through at that time? Once you're gay, you kicked out of Harvard? I forgot about that rule.
That happened in the 1920s at Harvard.
Oh my God.
There was a president who was very anti-gay, and he expelled over a dozen gay students.
Sheesh.
And this came to light. The Harvard Crimson, the student newspaper, did this like amazing student journalism in 2004, bringing all this to light. And the administration eventually like apologized. And obviously, it's way later, so it's not the same people.
So you are in danger of that now, but
no, fortunately, it was no longer the 1920s. But yeah, so then I think I just realized that my negative responses had no rational like basis to them, but it was very helpful that I'd already kind of tried to work through things impersonally. Anyway, all that to say, once I then got over it and realized I didn't actually have any like good reasons to be depressed other than just not wanting to go through like the challenges of coming out to my family and church and things like that, I thought, okay, actually, remember how you were thinking, to myself, remember how you were thinking that it would be really good for some gay person to like try to help kind of create more of these resources. I was like, you're actually in a pretty good position now to do that. So you should probably do that since you're very aware of the need for that. And so I ended up then going home, coming out to my parents. They were both loving, but especially my dad was still, it was a process. We started studying the Bible together, and he was hoping I would change my mind, and I was hoping he would change his mind, and he eventually did change his mind. I give him a lot of credit for being willing. Like, he was open-minded about it, even though he had strong views. Like, he was still like, okay, like, I'm willing to like hear you out, and I'm willing to consider your perspective, but like, he was not expecting to. He also wanted me to stay open, which is, and that was a good challenge. And I was like, okay, I need to also like stay open and be willing to hear other perspectives. And even though this is not what I think, like I need to extend that same, openness that I'm wanting in the other direction. But so eventually then my number one goal was just, I wanted to give a talk that I could post a video of on YouTube that was basically in about an hour, breaking down like these, like analyzing, kind of making an argument about these main 6 passages in the Bible relating to same-sex relations, and how like theologically conservative Christians could and should interpret those verses in a way that still made room for same-sex marriages. And so I ultimately gave that talk at a church. Originally I was like, I hope maybe my church will let me do it. No, they would not let me do that. But so then I found a different church in town later on. But I had a lot of conversations. Like, coming out to people at my church was, I think, very a learning experience, because it was excruciating in a lot of ways, as I'm sure you know. But like a lot of family friends, or like friends of my parents, where I would go out and have dinner with them, like 1-on-2, and come out to them. And it was like, there's just so much, anxiety that's built up there. And in some cases, people responded. There was a whole spectrum of responses. Some people responded well, and it turns out actually were effectively affirming. Other people responded very poorly, and it ended their 30-year relationship with my parents, me coming out to them. And so I felt really guilty about that. I felt bad.
Yeah, of course.
But then I'd say more people were somewhere in the middle, where they were not affirming, but they were also like, they didn't like be like, we'll never, they were trying to be loving. Which I appreciate. And it was also helpful then, like, I ended up like writing increasingly like long kind of like papers, like kind of about like how I like my view of these verses, and then people would like respond and critique, and it was actually very helpful to kind of have my thinking challenged and refined through those kinds of conversations and dialogues. So then by the time in 2012, early 2012, I did give this talk that I recorded and posted on YouTube at a different church. And that kind of became the basis of everything that I've been doing since then. Wow. I had no intention of writing a book or starting an organization at this point, because I just thought, hey, like, I just want to get I want to get the message out as easily and accessibly as possible. So YouTube video seems like a great way to do it. It seems like more accessible than a book.
Right.
But then the YouTube video generated itself like so many like responses and dozens of like critiques from, non-affirming pastors or theologians, which I was excited about, honestly. I was like, I love this, because the big struggle that I had when I was first trying to come out of my church was just feeling like you want there to be any room at all to even be listened to or to be heard. Like, even if people don't agree, you at least feel like, and I think what it felt like, especially in my church of 2,000 people, eventually, I mean, no one had ever come out and tried to stay before, to my knowledge. And so, and that's because it's effectively not possible to do if you are affirming.
Right.
And so that's what I found is like, especially with the people who we had a relationship with, like people who had been my Sunday school teachers or people, who were close family friends, there's room in those relationships to have a conversation even across disagreement, but not in a church of 2,000 people. Like eventually you feel like it kind of feels like you're really just hitting a wall, and you kind of at some point, like the misalignment there is too significant.
Yeah,
so,
it's not comfortable to be there anymore. You gotta figure something out.
So that's why I've actually I've never been in any way offended by like non-affirming critiques of my work, or like when the original version of that's the original version of God and the Gay Christian.
Oh yeah.
Over here. This is the updated version right here.
Yep.
When the original version came out in 2014, the same morning it was released, the five of the top Southern Baptist theologians wrote a book rebuttal called God and the Gay Christian ? Response to Matthew Vines. And I was honored, honestly.
Yeah, they're listening.
I was
they're
like,
reading it.
I was like, this is amazing, because I'm 24 at the time. And like, I just felt like, and obviously they had a very, critical perspective. But I was like, but of course they have a critical perspective because that's their viewpoint. So
yeah, and you lived in this, so it's not like it's surprising to you. You already had these discussions like 100 times with how many people?
So in a lot of ways, everything that I've been trying to do has been, I want to kind of start the conversation. I'd love eventually to not be having it anymore, but
right, to be in a world where we don't need to have it anymore would be fantastic.
But I feel like one of the biggest challenges for LGBT Christians in conservative churches is that there's no room to have a conversation at all. And I really do believe that once people reckon with certain things and certain realities, especially just the reality of sexual orientation, it tends, like the train that leaves the station tends to not come back. Like things tend to move in one direction once there's a certain amount of openness, because, and it's not because, as some conservative Christians would see it, because secular leftist culture is subverting and infiltrating the church. It's because reality has a correcting influence. So once you acknowledge, like, if the reality of sexual orientation, like if same-sex relationships in reality were not good and were bad, then I don't think this would have the same effect. It's not like people are being forced to change their views. It's that once people there's more of an openness and space to consider these things, like the reality of them is a difficult thing to consistently deny. So
it's like when people are actually exposed to what gay people's lives are like, what their futures are like, and what the journey of not ever being able to find someone you love, etc., that changes people. Like, so if people being exposed to real people and real truth and real experiences changes minds, what does that say about the current opinions and current ideas about gay people? Exactly. I'm right. So
and
it's so huge.
I think there's a corollary just when it comes to the biblical side of things, because certainly the church that I was raised in, the idea was, like, especially when this became more of a live discussion around 2010, 2011, which ironically was the same time I was trying to come out to the church, which was not ideal timing. The framing of it was very much about the liberals in Louisville, because Louisville was the headquarter in Kentucky, is the headquarters of the Presbyterian Church USA. And so there was just this idea that basically the liberals in the denomination do not believe in the authority of the Bible. They do not believe in the lordship of Jesus Christ. They are questioning and challenging any number of core doctrines, and marriage and sexuality is just another one of them. And so basically the way that the liberals in the denomination come to an affirming view is by rejecting or at least diminishing the authority of the Bible. We, as evangelicals in the denomination, believe in the authority of the Bible. We believe in the lordship of Jesus Christ, and therefore we are not affirming. And that framing, I do think, captured something that was a real division within the church. I mean, it was true that a lot of the people in the denomination, not all of them by any means, but a number of people, including a number of visible people who were advocating for an affirming view, were certainly downplaying the authority of the Bible in order to make their argument. You would often hear arguments to the effect of, well, that's Paul, and Paul's not Jesus, and so we are free to set aside what Paul said. Like, that is an argument that is it's like dead on arrival for an evangelical Christian. Like, that's just it's revealing just a different view of Scripture and of the authority of Scripture.
It's like the literal view, whether you believe everything in the Bible is literal, or there's better words for it, or you believe that some of it can be negotiated with. Authoritative, I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of people on those different. It's fascinating.
I don't know anyone who actually believes everything in the Bible should be taken literally, because there are things in the Bible that obviously are not intended to be taken literally, like heaping burning coals on your enemy's head. Like there's a lot of language that's intended to be metaphorical. It's more the question of like, is everything the Bible? If the Bible teaches something normatively, is that authoritative for Christians or not? Like,
yes.
And so
what you've taught in your book as well is that you can fully come at those arguments with confidence, because even if you're being totally what you said, I don't want to repeat it because I'm going to butcher it. But even if you're believing the Bible is fully authoritative and all those things, and what Paul said is fully canon, that there's still an argument to be made for being gay is okay.
Yes. I think, that's kind of the whole premise of my book and my work, is that Christians can both fully affirm the authority of the Bible and affirm same-sex marriages. So that's, and so I think that to the extent that most conservative Christians have not been even familiar with or exposed to that sort of a perspective, it also that limits the cognitive dissonance. It makes it easier to be like, hey, this isn't, even if this might be hard or in some respects seem unfair, this is just a fundamental worldview issue. Or the other way it's often framed is you have secular, LGBTQ culture that doesn't believe the same things that we believe, not just about same-sex relationships, but we believe that sex is sacred. We believe that sexuality was designed for covenant, for commitment, for all these things, and culture believes that sex is it's fine to use it only for pleasure or only for entertainment or only for casual purposes if you want. And so fundamentally, it's like a fundamental values distinction that isn't really, it's not about, there's nothing unfair about it. There's no double standard involved, because it's just, we believe it's sacred, culture believes it's not. And there's certainly some truth to that in terms of different perspectives that you can find out there. But my point is, I also believe that sexuality is sacred and is designed for covenantal commitment and love. And I just want, as a gay Christian, I think gay Christians should be able to participate in that in the same way as everybody else, both with the same support, but also the same standards and responsibilities. And so I think once the conversation is had on the terms of Scripture itself, with a respect for Scripture's authority and with an acknowledgement of the reality of same-sex orientation, it is extremely common at that point for people's views to move in one direction, which is an affirming direction, once those things are present. But I don't think it's inevitable necessarily that people would change their views. You have to, if those things are not all accounted for, then for a lot of people, their views are kind of remained hermetically sealed, because it feels like it's a worldview clash, and that's much easier just to kind of ignore and just be like, well, just different worldviews, moving on. So I think that's what I've been grateful for, just in terms of the visibility that my book has been able to achieve, is just, I think in many ways, this is a long-term undertaking. But step one has to be establishing establishing the visibility of this argument, period.
Yep, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are deconstructing. I've mentioned I've deconstructed a little bit because I was highly religious, Bethel culture, all that, and then kind of had to rethink what I believe. But I think whether you're deconstructing or not, I do think it's very... there's very good arguments for, even if you're living a totally traditionally Christian evangelical lifestyle, being gay still makes sense. And there's still a lot of very good arguments for being able to be in a traditional romance, traditional marriage, monogamy, etc., and do that in a homosexual relationship. That is not I think it was always framed like if you want to be fully Christian, fully traditionally Christian, that is just off the table. You can never be gay. And I really appreciate that you've brought so many good arguments to the fact that you can live a completely traditional Christian life and be gay, and it can be beautiful. And I think, and then again, I guess to move forward in that, I believe you are married. Yeah, you have entered into a traditional Christian romantic relationship.
Yeah,
and that's been how long? How long has that been?
It feels a little funny to say I've entered into a traditional Christian relationship,
but
yeah,
sentence.
I kind of. I got married at the end of 2022.
Congratulations.
So we're
awesome.
Coming up on 3 years. Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. But I guess, and then pushing forward, because I don't want to take too much more of your time, but so it's been 10 years since the book launched, and obviously got a lot of feedback, negative, good. You made people think. You were 24 and you made people question everything. And it kind of took, like, millennials had to do a lot of the work because the generation before didn't do much. And I think we are the ones who we were waiting for other people to talk about this, but a lot of us have had to step up to the plate because I don't know what happened. I think they stifled some of the last generations, but our generation's really questioning, really talking. We're on the internet. We're communicating better. But you made a big dent in this space. And so first, thank you. But then second,
thank you.
What has changed in the last 10 years? How has your opinions changed along with how the political climate and everything has come? Even, I think there's been some forward motion, some backlash. But what inspired you to revise this book? What is new in this book? And where are you at in this season? That's a big question, but I think you can handle it.
It's a big question. Okay, I'll try to break it down to 2 parts. So in terms of why I revised the book, primarily it's because, after 10 years, I thought it's due for an update. There have been, I can't even count how many dozens of books have responded or critiqued my argument in some way. And I wanted an opportunity to be able to then address some of what I saw as the best critiques and incorporate that into the book. So I added a couple appendices. This version of the book is longer. I still wanted it to be accessible and easy for people to get through.
Yeah.
So a lot of the new content is actually in a couple appendices that I added. So Preston Sprinkle, who's a non-affirming, often seen as side B Christian writer, he wrote a book in 2015 called People to Be Loved that has been pretty popular among non-affirming Christians. And so his primary critique of my argument was, so part of my argument is based on what you might call the cultural distance idea, which is that the types of same-sex practices in the biblical world are fundamentally different from the types of same-sex marriages that we're talking about today. And also the entire concept of people who are exclusively attracted to the same sex is not something that we see reflected in ancient literature. And so this recognition now that maintaining a categorical prohibition on same-sex relationships would require lifelong singleness and celibacy for any group of people is not something that the church was reckoning with until about the middle of the 20th century is the first time we see any Christian writers acknowledging that reality in writing that I have been able to find. And so Preston Sprinkle's critique has been, no, actually, Matthew overstates the cultural distance. Actually, there were same-sex marriages in Paul's day and in the biblical world, and there were relationships that are very similar to what we're talking about today. And so Paul would have had those same relationships in mind, and also he would have had a pretty similar concept of sexual orientation in mind. So I added 2 appendices that address those 2 questions. And this may be more, I won't go into great detail here because it may be more in the weeds than the average person wants. But so let's see. Appendix A, did same-sex marriage exist in the biblical world? Appendix B is, did the concept of sexual orientation exist in the biblical world? And it's not just Preston's arguments. He's just the primary person. N.T. Wright has made some similar arguments. There's been a few other people making similar cases. So I basically address in detail all those counter arguments, and I think it's, I feel quite confident in my position that we just have to define our terms correctly. So Preston and I've gone back and forth on this a little bit. I did a video a few years ago responding to some of his claims, and he keeps trying to expand the question to, did consensual same-sex relationships exist in the biblical world? And I'm like, I'm not contesting that. What I'm saying is, what we're talking about today are relationships that are defined by three fundamental features. One, they are lifelong. Two, they are monogamous. Three, they are between partners who are of the same social status. And if there are no relationships from all extant ancient literature that are between people of the same sex that are marked by those three features. And the most, in many respects, the most significant one is the issue of the social status of the partners. Because in the deeply patriarchal background of the ancient world, really all relationships were predicated on the hierarchy of men over women. And so for like the Greeks and Romans, who broadly did accept forms of same-sex relationships, the only forms that they accepted were forms that were hierarchical in nature. Now, that does not mean that they are therefore not consensual. This gets into some, like, obviously people can have their different philosophical opinions about how to define that. But I'm saying, I mean, you can have relationships where both people are certainly understand themselves to be freely entering into the relationship, but it's still a very hierarchically structured relationship in terms of everybody knows one person is seen as the superior and the other seen as inferior in terms of their social status, their and essentially even their value in the world. So what you cannot have, there's a fascinating book, if you're really interested in this. This is the best book on the topic. It's called Roman Homosexuality by a classicist named Craig Williams. It's phenomenal. And I'm so grateful for the work of a lot of these classicists because, I mean, again, a lot of what I'm trying to do, I'm not trying to break new ground. I'm really trying to just I love studying scholarship. I get really, I love to nerd out on this stuff. And my goal is then just to take a lot of the fantastic academic work that has been done over the decades and try to popularize it and try to make it accessible to the average person who is not as interested or does not have the same amount of time to read hundreds of books on these topics. So that's really what I'm trying to do is I'm not a classicist, but I love reading classicists. And fortunately, the history of sexuality as a field of academic study has developed so much since when it began in the late 70s, early 80s, that a lot of these questions, there's now a pretty broad consensus among historians of sexuality on them. So I'm not trying to be I'm coming up with a new interpretation of this random Greek text. It's no, I am going, here's the debate that's happened here, and here's kind of the broad consensus that's formed, and here's what it is, and it's not consistent with Preston Sprinkle's perspective. So anyway, all to be saying, no, there are not relationships that, and this is what Craig Williams says too, is basically the primary form of same-sex relationship that you could not have as a free Roman man was a reciprocal, lasting relationship with another free adult Roman man. Because the hierarchy is not being mirrored appropriately that is supposed to be reflected. So all that to say, I do think that the types of relationships we're talking about today are categorically different than the types of same-sex practices in the ancient world, likewise with the concept of sexual orientation itself. So I added some of these things that are getting into the weeds, but are actually very important questions that I wanted to have in writing for for people who want to go there. But I also just updated in the introduction. I actually replaced the last two chapters with entirely new content. There's a new argument that I developed that I really love that's about usury, which is charging interest on loans. And in a nutshell, the Bible categorically prohibits charging interest on loans, any amount of interest at all. Initially, this was prohibited, there was initially an exception for Israelites charging interest to foreigners in Deuteronomy, but by Ezekiel and Psalms, the language is categorical, and then Jesus has often been interpreted. So for the first 1,500 years of the church, everybody in the church, all church theologians, councils, leaders, popes agreed that charging any amount of interest on a loan was intrinsically sinful, and it was seen as a grave sin that would separate people from God for eternity, that would prevent people from inheriting the kingdom of heaven. And then John Calvin comes along in the 16th century and reinterprets the biblical prohibitions of charging interest on loans and says that the reason why the Bible prohibited this practice categorically was to protect the poor from being exploited. And he said we need to uphold the moral logic, effectively, of these texts, the purpose of the lawgiver. He said we have to uphold that, but we can also recognize that our economy is shifting dramatically and an increasingly commercial economy as opposed to the agrarian economies of the ancient and much of the early church, that in our commercial world, there can be a great value to charging a moderate amount of interest to wealthy people to then be able to have more capital to start businesses that can benefit the whole community. And so his reinterpretation is now virtually universally accepted among Christians, to the point that almost no Christians, there are very few, most Christians don't even know that this was ever a debate. Most Christians don't know that Dante and his Inferno put usurers in the same seventh circle of hell along with sodomites, both of whom he said were guilty of a sin against nature. And usury has now been redefined to mean excessive interest on loans, but it used to just mean any interest whatsoever on loans. We basically all do this in some form or fashion. If you have a savings account at a bank, you receive a tiny amount of interest on that every year. Like, that would have been seen as a terrible sin up until the time of John Calvin. So I added a whole section on this, just like fleshing this argument out, because I think it's a really fascinating precedent in church tradition for a moral issue that was seen based on biblical prohibitions as categorically sinful, but then was reinterpreted. Not to say we don't care what the Bible says. We should still care what the Bible says about usury for sure. Just try to be more recognizing, okay, maybe our context is different enough that we should make, like, not all forms of, that there could be forms of interest that actually are upholding the golden rule, this sort of thing. And so we've done that before, and so I think that there is some fertile ground there for, thinking about how that applies to this topic. Okay, so that was some of the updates in the book. But then the other part of your question, unless you were going to say something else.
No, I think that is very interesting. Comparing all these contexts can be very useful. I mean, there's so many places where we've rethought the context, and this the gay issue is one where they won't even touch thinking about the context, which is fascinating. But second part, what were you going to say?
Oh, the second part, you were just saying kind of like where are things at now, the shifts in kind of cultural, political climate, all of those things. And it is interesting because in some respects, I feel like we've made progress, certainly, since the book initially came out. And that's obviously, marriage equality was not legal across the whole country.
Right.
If you look at public opinion polls, they are generally in a better place now than they were 10 years ago. And so there have been a lot of good things. The things that have been less good have been that I think the polarization that already was a significant barrier to having this conversation 10 years ago has only gotten worse. And that's not just true with this topic, that's true with every topic. And I think in a lot of respects that is a function of social media and the way that its algorithms are so oriented toward outrage. And so whatever is the most inflammatory thing that anybody in a particular group says is likely to then go viral and reshape perceptions of what that group as a whole stands for or believes. And so I do think that the part of what we're seeing is a retrenchment and a doubling down among people who are more conservative, both politically and or theologically, to feel like I think this idea that this is a fundamental worldview clash has been intensified by the increased polarization, and that contributes to people not even wanting to touch the conversation at all, because it feels like there's even no point in touching this, because the only possibility here is if you change your mind on this, you have to do a complete 180 in your entire worldview, and you have to move from being a part of there's two warring tribes in society, right? And you're part of one of them, and when you pick one of them, you have to agree with all 57 beliefs on all issues, because if you disagree with one of these 57 things, you get ejected from that group. And so then you can either go join the other group and agree with all 57 things over here, or exist in no man's land. And existing in no man's land is not fun. And there are a lot of people who do that, but it's not fun. And it's much harder to find a sense of belonging and community and connection in that middle ground. And so I think there's a lot more comfort in being like, I'm going to pick my tribe where I broadly agree with it. And even if there are a few things that, maybe I'm not totally sure we're right about this, I'm not going to question it. And I'm certainly not going to try to open up a debate around it, because that means the end of my belonging and the end of my sense of community and connection. And so I think that's probably, I feel like, the biggest obstacle actually to what I'm trying to do, and just to the challenge of LGBT Christians trying to be better understood or accepted in more conservative churches is that broader cultural and political polarization, which unfortunately has gotten worse over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've seen the same. I think even starting this project, like, I've been in this space for like a couple years, year and a half. and my goal is also to help bring people closer and listen to each other, and whether you change your mind or not, at least bring compassion, right? And understanding. So it is disheartening. I do hope that we are on a path where maybe we've polarized so hard that maybe everyone's just going to get tired and have to relax and just like live and be human again. I feel like we're so political lately that we're just all charged up, and I would love for it to go to more of a space of seeing the humanity in each other, because we're all cut from the same cloth. We just have been in different information tunnels that go deeper and deeper, and you hear it's more of an echo chamber than ever in this particular time in history. So I'm hopeful that things will get better, but it's a little intense right now. I'm hoping to see some hope.
Yeah, it is for sure. And I'm just trying to stay focused on bridge building and doing that, and trying to extend a hand to be able to reach people who are at a place where they have that openness. Because I don't think, I think I think there can be a temptation to be like, let's all retreat from the bridges because the bridges are dangerous. And bridges, either because bridges get walked on and they're not pleasant, or bridges are sometimes even seen as a threat to one's own tribe effectively, because you might then, if you seem like you don't, or you just don't agree with us on enough, and if you're only agreeing with us on 47 of the 57 things, then actually maybe maybe we should boot you out, and then you're a bridge to nowhere. But I just don't. I feel like it's much better to just think through carefully what you believe and why you believe it, and then unless you're genuinely persuaded on the merits, to rethink something, to stay true to your values and beliefs, even when it's not like where there's a big party, where it feels like, there's a lot of energy around that. And I am hopeful that eventually, this is just always the case, and especially in our kind of thermostatic political culture, where one group gets into power, and then there's almost an effort, at least among some members of that tribe, of how far can we push things until you then have pushed too far. And so I think part of the moment that we're in right now is, like, conservatives, I think, do feel much more emboldened and empowered to be kind of making a renewed critique of of everything under the LGBTQ umbrella. And it will, I think, so, and again, I do want to be open to, like, good faith critiques and criticisms. I don't think any group is beyond, to the, there are areas where I would like to see, aspects of the LGBTQ movement do things differently or better, or ways that I feel like are, like, more grounded or anchored, any of these things. So it's not like these critiques, it's not like there should be no place for them, but things could easily overcorrect and be taken to a point where, so I am concerned about that, but I feel like all you can do is just try to continue to stay true to your values and beliefs and what you're doing. And then we can't always control kind of the broader, weather or climate, or whichever one makes the most sense.
No, I'm with you. We can't control it all. And I guess just keep doing what we're doing and keep trying our best to show love and openness. And it's hard, but I think you're doing a great job. I think I'm, like, happy you're sticking to your mission, sticking to your guns, and still doing what you're doing. And I think we just exist. I think our biggest argument is just existing and being ourselves and letting people just observe. And it's not really fair that we have to go through all this, but you know what? We are doing a lot better than they were like 30 years ago. So
for sure. I'd much rather live now than most any other time in history.
Yeah.
And I also think too, like, part of my argument too, this is the last thing I'll say, is that, like, a part of my argument from the beginning has been about the fruit. So Jesus in Matthew 7 talks about, false prophets. and says that, you'll know them by their fruit, and that, a good tree is not going to produce bad fruit, and a bad tree is not going to produce good fruit. And I think that the principle in this text, even though it's specifically about false prophets, which has also been interpreted to mean false teachers, there have been various Christians throughout history who have also argued for applying this principle to teachings themselves. Sometimes if you're not sure, okay, we've got two kind of competing interpretations of Scripture, and maybe they both seem plausible on their face. Well, let's look to the fruit of them. Like, which one seems to be bearing the fruit of the Spirit? And with non-affirming teachings in particular, they cause a tremendous amount of pain, suffering, and harm that has no clear redemptive purpose. So whereas on the other hand, like same-sex marriages, it's not that every same-sex relationship is going to be awesome, right? But there are many amazing same-sex relationships that do seem to be bearing all of the fruit of the Spirit. And so I think that's quite important if you're like, okay, I'm not sure. I see these two possible ways of reading Scripture. One of them seems to lead to an incredible amount of destruction, pain, and suffering, and the other one seems to lead to the fruit of the Spirit and love, joy, peace, kindness, right? All of these things. That's an important indicator. And so I think the same is true for like non-affirming Christians just looking at like, oh, okay, because the real question is like, can you be gay and Christian? And I think to me, there are two pressures on that concept, one from the right and one from the left. So from the right, the pressure is that no, you can't be gay, right? That being gay is bad, being gay is a sin, that sort of thing. But what I've also found is that sometimes I feel like there can be, and certainly people go through their own processes, and I'm perfectly understanding and sympathetic to why there are lots of people who do come out and eventually are no longer Christian, right? That the rejection can be a really scarring experience for a lot of people. And so I absolutely understand it. At the same time, I think it's really helpful and important to be able to have examples of people who are gay and still Christian and still like clearly committed to their core Christian faith beliefs. And sometimes in some progressive Christian circles, I have sensed or even experienced pushback on me still believing in the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, like that I deeply believe in the Trinity, that Jesus is fully human and fully divine, that he died for our sins, that he was bodily raised from the dead, all these things. And again, I have lots of compassion for all the reasons why people may no longer still be a Christian, but I do deeply believe these things. And I get sometimes, I feel like I've encountered some people who are very zealous allies, which I appreciate, but are also become very zealous about kind of deconstructing all of Orthodox Christian theology to the point where it feels to me like, even though they may not intend it, their message is almost saying you can't be gay and Christian, but it's the Christian part that they have a problem with. Or it's like, well, you have to completely redefine what the word Christian means, and it can't be any Orthodox conception of Christian belief, as in like the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. And again, people are free to make whatever arguments they want for challenging whatever views they want, but I don't think it's ultimately helpful for the average LGBT Christian if the two primary messages people are hearing is, one, you can't be gay and Christian because the gay part's bad, and two, you can't be gay and Christian because the traditional Orthodox Christian part all needs to be deconstructed or done away with. And so part of what I'm trying to say is actually, no, you can be gay and Christian. It is okay to be gay, and you can still be a believer in the traditional like doctrines of the Christian faith, none of which, when you're looking at like the primary first order faith beliefs, none of them are about marriage and sexuality. In fact, none of them are about ethical issues at all. That's not because ethical issues aren't important, but it's just like that's not actually what has always been the most distinctive Christian beliefs about who Jesus is, who God is, what Jesus and God have done for humanity to reconcile humanity to themselves, like those, and then kind of how we're seeking to, right? Like, so I feel like that's part of what I'm hoping from a fruit standpoint as well. I think the more that people are able to see the fruit of that you can still be gay and Christian, and that there are people able to model and live that out, I think that is a very necessary and helpful thing. So the Reformation Project, the organization that I run, our three core values as an organization are love for God, love for the Bible, and love for the church, which in some ways are just like very, I guess, straightforward or obvious seeming, but I think that they're quite helpful. They've been very helpful for us as an organization in terms of staying grounded and staying like anchored in our faith. And obviously there's a lot of, and not kind of just trying to move into an oppositional posture of we're angry or we're upset and we're kind of, that's our primary driver is anger, because that it ultimately leads to a really different and I think less healthy posture toward the church that also doesn't tend to like feed into people's long-term own happiness and fulfillment in my experience. So yeah, I mean, if people like we do our conference this year is going to be October 2nd through the 4th in Atlanta, Georgia, our Reconcile and Reform conference. And so especially if people like kind of are aligned with like those values, that vision, that resonates with where people are at, anybody, I mean, even if it doesn't, anyone's welcome to come to the conference. I mean, we have non-affirming people who come sometime, we have atheists who come sometime, everyone is welcome. But especially if like that vision and values are resonant for people, I think they would particularly enjoy meeting other people kind of in a similar place at the conference. So I just want to let people know about that in case they're interested.
Awesome. No, I'm with you. I think we should believe that you can have a traditional Christian worldview and be gay, and I do think there are different arguments for that. I think a lot of people are deconstructing for a lot of reasons, not just that, because I think that there's a lot of disillusionment in how the church is acting, and I think for me, being gay and then I think when the church is pushing you in a belief that was harmful for you for so many years, I think the natural reaction is to start to question other beliefs and then realize that you believed all these things from childhood and you've never really thought through them and questioned them. It's not just the gays. I think a lot of people are deconstructing just because the church has put religion in front of love for a while in a lot of sectors. Not all of them. There's so many churches that are doing such beautiful work. So I think it's a complex issue. There's a lot of reasons why a lot of people are deconstructing, but I also do believe that we should all have different views and have different walks with God and have different walks with our faith. And so I think it's really important that people are doing work like you're doing, and that you want to like traditional Christian worldview and you are living freely in your sexuality, which I think you're modeling well and doing well. So yeah, thank you for this interview. I think this has been really awesome. And how can people, what's the best place for people to find your book and find you?
Well, it's right here. So if people happen to just be right here, you can just get it on like any bookstore.
Well, what's your website? Is the website the best place to go? What's the best place? Or Amazon,
I have my personal website is just MatthewVines.com, and then there's ReformationProject.org, which is the Reformation Project. There's a lot more resources on the Reformation Project's website, like around Scripture and videos from conferences and downloadable things and video masterclasses.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think those would be the main places, or just following us on social media.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'll try to link those down below in the description. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for your book. I'm really excited to see how this 10th anniversary does, and wishing you the best.
Well, thank you so much, Nate. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, till we meet again, maybe in person someday. Come to
All
New
right,
York.
I hope so.
Have a hang. Okay, later.